Okay, so when you think about a trade war, what usually comes to mind, right? It's probably steel tariffs, maybe arguments over cars or lumber. But what if I told you that in 2026, one of the biggest showdowns between the US and Canada wasn't about any of that, but about trash? We are not the trash can of the United States. This quote from a Canadian member of parliament, Ruba Ghazal, just cuts right to the heart of it, doesn't it? This whole situation quickly became about more than just logistics at the Ontario-Michigan border. It turned into a matter of national pride. So how on earth did things get so bad? Well, it was a real perfect storm. You had environmental limits crashing head-on into huge economic pressures, and the whole thing was just lit on fire by political conflict. The problem, when you boil it down, was brutally simple. Ontario was running out of places to put its garbage, and Michigan had become its only escape hatch. And to really get a sense of the scale we're talking about, just look at this number, 3.46 million tons. That is the amount of trash that was flowing from Ontario into Michigan landfills every single year. We're not talking about a small leak here. This was a literal river of garbage crossing the border. And that river of trash? It made a huge impact. It turns out Canadian garbage accounted for over 14% of all the waste being dumped in Michigan. Think about it this way. For every 7 garbage trucks you saw pulling into a Michigan landfill, one of them was from Canada. You can see why that started to create some serious political heat. So why Michigan? Why not somewhere else? Honestly, it all came down to simple economics. Michigan's tipping fee, that's the price you pay to dump a ton of trash, was an unbelievably low 36 cents. Now compare that to almost $5 in Ohio or $13 in Wisconsin. If you're a Canadian waste hauler, it's a total no-brainer. Michigan wasn't just an option, it became this massive financial magnet. And then things went from bad to worse really fast. In 2025, the Trump administration hits Canadian goods with a 25% tariff. And guess what was on the list? Yep, garbage. Now it's a taxable good. Then Michigan's Governor Whitmer moves to jack up that tipping fee by a massive 1,288%. So Ontario's Premier Doug Ford fires back, threatening energy surcharges. It was just this incredible explosion of local, state, and international tension. Okay, so with the border basically shut and costs going through the roof, the old way of doing business was completely falling apart. It was a real burn the boats moment for the entire waste industry. And it was out of that chaos that a totally new way of thinking started to emerge, one that looked less like a landfill and a lot more like something from Silicon Valley. And this brings us to the key innovation here, something called the Digital Refinery. This is a software system created by a company called 95wood. And the big idea is this. Stop thinking of construction waste as just garbage you have to bury. Instead, start treating it like a raw material that can be refined into a valuable and, more importantly, a verifiable asset. It's a total shift in mindset, from just moving stuff around to actually manufacturing something of value. So how does it actually work? Well, it's a really simple 3-step flow. First, an app on a device uses AI to scan a load of wood waste. It scores the quality, and crucially, it locks in the origin using GPS. Second, the system automatically calculates all the financial benefits, like levy savings, and even how to turn that waste into tradable carbon assets. And finally, a secure digital signature seals the record, creating this permanent, totally audit-ready manifest. All right, so we've got this new technology, but let's bring it back to that absolute geopolitical nightmare we were talking about. How does a simple app on a phone actually solve a multi-million-dollar trade war? Remember those 25% tariffs? To get around them, you had to prove your goods came from North America. But how in the world do you do that for a truck full of mixed demolition debris? Are you supposed to certify every single 2x4? It was a logistical impossibility, and it made the entire industry completely vulnerable to these political games. And here it is. This is the solution. The manifest that the digital refinery system automatically generates isn't just a simple receipt. It's a digitally signed, audit-proof PDF that has all the data required to act as an official USMCA certificate of origin. It's basically the key that unlocks the border, slicing right through all that geopolitical red tape. And here's the really clever part. A USMCA certificate of origin needs 9 very specific pieces of information. The app is built from the ground up to capture every single one of them automatically as part of its normal workflow, from who the exporter is to the official tariff code for waste. So compliance isn't some extra step you have to worry about. It's just baked right into the process. And just like that, the tariff threat is gone. Now, for this to actually stand up in a legal fight, the system has to be completely airtight. It can't just make stuff up. And this is where it gets really smart. You see, a standard AI, like ChatGPT, might hallucinate a legal fact just because it sounds right. But the digital refinery uses a different approach. It anchors all of its reasoning to a specific verified library of facts, in this case, the actual text of Ontario's environmental laws. It's not allowed to guess. And the result is a system that gives you real answers. So when it flags a load of waste, it doesn't just say, problem. It tells you why there's a problem, citing the specific regulation it violates. It literally quotes the law back at you. What that creates is a rock-solid, defensible audit trail that you could actually take into a courtroom. So, when you zoom out, what does all this really mean for the future of this industry? Well, the crisis at the border proved one huge thing. For the modern waste industry, survival isn't just about having the most trucks anymore. It's become a software problem. You can really see the massive difference here. The old way of doing things was built on razor-thin margins, and it was totally exposed to risk. One politician's decision could wipe you out. But the digital refinery model? It's insulated from all that. Its revenue is diversified, it comes from avoiding levies, generating carbon credits, and logistics. It completely changes waste from a liability into a data-rich asset. And, if that huge cross-border crisis wasn't enough to force a change, there's another clock ticking right at home. By the year 2029, a new law in Ontario will make it completely illegal to send any wood waste to any landfill in the province. Full stop. This means a system like this, for digital tracking and verification, isn't just a nice-to-have anymore. It's an absolute necessity just to stay in business. And that really brings us to the big final thought here. This whole crisis forced a revolution for just one kind of garbage, wood. But it leaves us with this really fascinating question to think about. If we can turn a pile of scrap wood into a sophisticated digital asset, what other piles of so-called trash are we just throwing away simply because we don't have the data to see what they're truly worth?